An ugly incident marred the opening moments of the match. Scott Carter has a suspected broken jaw and Peter Spring could have a date with Phillip Street. The Knights have copped a bagging in the past 3 weeks, but today was different. Mark Sargent returned to his brilliant best with a big solid burst, then a dust-up between Spring and the Knights heavyweights, and it was Spring who was sprung 10 minutes in the bin. From there the Knights cut loose and Sargent was in the front line. Steve Fulmer at halfback was simply electric. Marty Creaker converted and at half-time the Knights led 18-0. St George hit back midway during the second half through Higgins. Ashley Gordon got the Knights back on track to a win with number 2. And the flash wasn't finished in the try-scoring department. Bailey crossed for a belated Dragons try, and then David Boyd finished it off for the Knights.
The Magpie goslings arrived on the weekend and are being kept in isolation. A small heater will keep them warm during our winter, simulating their Northern Territory environment. They are also being kept away from the eyes of visitors so they don't become tame during their time in captivity. This is what you might call an NBN exclusive. This is the first time and the last that these little guys will be seen in public until they're released into the wild in 3 months' time. Magpie geese used to inhabit the Hunter in large numbers, but early in the 1900s breeding groups began to disappear as pastoralists drained swamps for grazing. The Wetlands Centre is trying to build up the numbers of magpie geese in the area and already has just over 100 birds which originated in Victoria. The geese from the top end will expand the gene pool of the Shortland population and strengthen the chances of the species' survival.
Whether or not we can get the numbers up to a point where the population is sustainable long term is the real question, and it would be really exciting if we could do that.
Do you know yet whether you've got females or males and how good this little group will be for reproducing?
No, we don't know such subtleties just yet. I imagine all sorts of people would have all sorts of opinions if you looked at their behaviour. There's a fair bit of aggression in there and a fair bit of sibling rivalry, but what that means with regard to their sex, we don't know yet.
Aggressive or otherwise, it's hard to imagine these fuzzy little goslings fending for themselves for some time yet. Alison Peters for NBN News. The rebellion was actually a part of history lessons at Warners Bay Public School. Year 5 and 6 classes have been studying gold in Australia, and today's pageant was a full-scale recreation of the Eureka Stockade. The story began in 1851. Edward Hargraves and his partners discovered gold. The hordes arrived at the goldfields of New South Wales and Victoria. The police harassed unlicensed miners. The miners burnt their licences and declared their solidarity. The Eureka battle was fought, changing the history of Australia and becoming a part of the Australian national identity.
The loss of the Royal Newcastle Hospital's North and York wings and the closure of a wing at Mater Hospital are a legacy of the earthquake, which will haunt the health system for another 6 months until the John Hunter Teaching Hospital comes into service. With forecasts of a flu epidemic on its way from Europe, those 6 months could be a desperate time. Even without that extra burden of patients, ambulance officers report that they're already being told to redirect patients to other facilities by hospitals which have no room. In a recent episode, an unconscious elderly woman patient being transported from Toronto to the Mater Hospital was redirected to the Royal.
She wasn't in immediate danger of dying, but nevertheless, she was very seriously ill. She was intubated and unconscious, and she needed definitive treatment as soon as possible. So it's quite clear to me that there is a serious acute problem of hospital beds in the Hunter.
Hunter Area Health Service Director Dr Owen James says there's a 70-bed shortage in the Hunter, but the service can turn to private health as a backup.
There are a number of private hospitals with whom we have a lot of confidence and negotiations. We estimate there are about 150 beds at the most available for taking of cases on contract from the Area Health Service hospitals, and we will use those if we have to.
A vaccination program is underway for people most at risk from the influenza A virus, but it's understood the vaccine is undersupplied and there may be yet another wave of illness in the wake of the earthquake.
As a result of additional stress, there's a higher rate of acute illness of stress type. There's a higher rate of mental illness. There's a higher rate of emotional breakdowns.
The state opposition has condemned the bed shortage, saying that a wing of the Mater Hospital could be reopened if the government wasn't committed to its budget restraints. The health service says reopening the 18-bed ward would cost almost $2 million, an unjustifiable amount for a temporary facility. In short, its advice is simple: just don't get sick.
The Newcastle group called New Body, New Life went through their paces today to prove this week's slogan, too old, never. They believe growing older is no excuse to put their feet up, in the traditional sense at least. Regular exercise classes are the key to continuing fitness, they say, and younger onlookers weren't prepared to argue. They also say that much of the physical decline associated with ageing is due to inactivity rather than the ageing process. A case of, if you don't use it, you lose it. So this reporter took note, but not in her notebook, and decided to delay the ageing process, at least for a little while. Rebecca Skinner, NBN News.
Both players have been called to Phillip Street in Sydney after being involved in an incident in the 4th minute of the match. Carter is alleged to have provoked an altercation with Spring by raising his elbow, while Spring has been cited for striking Carter, which resulted in the hooker ending up with a broken jaw in 3 places. Carter has been given a medical clearance to attend the hearing, which is in progress at the moment. The Knights coaching staff has stifled speculation as to the makeup of this week's team to play Illawarra by announcing it this afternoon. Michael Hagan resumes the captaincy in the 5/8 role. Robbie McCormack moves to the centres to replace Tony Kemp. Ashley Gordon and Marty Creaker retain their wing positions, and Glenn Frendo has kept the fullback's job in front of Gary Worth, who will line up in reserve grade. Paul Harrigan will start as a fresh reserve, with David Mullane moving to the vacant hooker's position, and Glanville, Butterfield, Boyd, Johnston and Sargent hold their places in the pack. Coach Alan McMahon was impressed with Frendo's performance against St George.
Glenn's played pretty well against St George, and Gary's coming off a rib cartilage injury, and the selectors thought that Glenn's performance was good enough to retain the position.
The push to decentralise businesses out of Sydney and the large population growth in areas like the Central Coast, Lake Macquarie and the Blue Mountains has prompted the first joint endeavour by nearly 20 councils. The idea is to reduce the cost of an STD call to Sydney from areas as far north as Newcastle and as far south as Wollongong to the cost of a local call. That means a call from an 049 number to Sydney would be reduced from 63 cents to 21 cents, a 66% reduction.
It'll mean reduced charges to them, which of course will flow on in their business activity, making them more competitive both within Australia and for those that export overseas, very much so.
But it's realised that the battle against telecom won't be easy.
Experience has shown that they're rather negative towards any reduction in charges to the community and to the industry and commerce.
So the public's support is being sought. Signatures are needed on petitions available over the next few weeks in libraries, councils and shopping centres. These and armfuls of letters supporting the reduction will be presented to Telecommunications Minister Kim Beazley in July.
The teachers claim their demands are not unreasonable and are angry at what they call the delaying tactics of the state government.
We're upset about the delaying actions caused by the state government. We had an Industrial Commission hearing on the 26th of February which laid down that both the government and TAFE teachers had to form working parties to negotiate structural efficiency changes. 11 weeks have gone by and we've been unable to get the government to come and have negotiations on those structural efficiency changes.
As well as giving the Federation Executive the go-ahead to organise further industrial action, today's meeting also reaffirmed a decision not to trade off working conditions for salary increases.
We've decided to carry on and continue to pressure the government in as many ways as possible, including amendments to the executive recommendation which talked about national action.
Those amendments include asking the Federation to consider a national day of protest with other public sector bodies and perhaps legal action against what they see as state government procrastination. Jodie McKay for NBN News.
Wests missed out on a sponsor last year but have made up the deficit with Peters. Over the next 3 years, Peters Ice Cream will spend $70,000 on the club, its first serious entry into league sponsorship. Wests have a long tradition of league in Newcastle and the club can see mutual benefit from the deal. Both Peters and Wests are orientated towards sport and family entertainment. For its money, the players will wear the Peters logo on their jumpers. The company will have ground advertising rights at Harker Oval and naming rights at the league bar.
In a number of other ways, we're associated with Matara, Surf Fest, and it was just another opportunity for us to do something in the area. And get a situation of mutual benefit.
The deal falls just short of the $75,000 sponsorship announced by North Nelson Bay. But with newcomers to the competition like former Sydney first grader Neil Baker, West star signing for the season, the local competition looks set for a sound future both on and off the field.
The local competition this year is getting stronger and stronger, and it has been for the last couple of years. And you know, it does say something for the local competition when we can find that people are prepared to put money into it, like Peter's.
The new 5-storey development is being undertaken by the insurance company Legal & General to replace its old premises in Hunter Street. The multi-million-dollar project has been on the drawing board since last year, but it now represents one of the first significant developments in the central business district following the earthquake. The Council's Director of Planning Services, Gary Fielding, says the design of the new building complies with the CBD urban design guidelines, recognising principles of street height and setback, and takes into account the character of the area. The project will be completed by June next year.
This is what happened when the Bogan River overflowed levees and flooded Nyngan. Concern for a population forced from their homes was shared in the Hunter.
I just yelled out to my neighbour, I just said, if there's any goods that you've got to go to Nyngan, then I could deliver to my brother whose home and property's been devastated up there.
What started as a call over the neighbour's fence led to a flood of a different kind.
From underwear to glasses, sheets, towels, toys, some toys, even remote control cars with batteries ready to be operated straight away.
Parents and pupils at Barnsley, Edgeworth and Katara schools, along with Apex members, have worked tirelessly gathering goods. Today they had a truckload to show for their efforts. Some pupils have included letters with the hope of finding pen pals. Many hands loaded the truck and farewelled the goods which should arrive in Nyngan by morning.
About a metre. Yeah, we had a metre this way. Like this trap out, that's all.
When the two men failed to return to Nora Head at 6 o'clock last night, a search was mounted. It wasn't until 9 o'clock this morning that the men were spotted drifting near the Wallara, about 8 kilometres off Catherine Hill Bay. Once it was determined the men were unharmed, the boat was towed back to Nora Head. Although the men were a little overwhelmed by the welcome they received, they were relieved to be back on dry land.
You right? Yeah. Scary, but fine.
According to the owner of the boat, Michael Bishop, they did everything right. It was just bad luck that both the motor and radio failed.
The radio broke down on the way out there. and the engine also broke down, and the seas became a lot bigger, and we couldn't. Actually, we did come in quite a bit, but we couldn't get in towards land, so we ended up off Catherine Hill Bay.
Without any warm clothes or blankets and with little food on board, the men say their night at sea was a frightening experience.
We had to lie on the bottom of the boat with the V-sheet over us to use the blanket because of the extreme cold and plus the rain. And we also had water coming in from the waves.
It's pecking death. I was very worried.
It appears today's rough seas has claimed yet another boat. Around 1 o'clock, searchers were called out to look for 2 men missing north of Newcastle.
It's believed that 2 men left Mooloolaba on Friday and were due to arrive in Sydney tomorrow morning. However, this afternoon, Sydney Water Police picked up a mayday call from somewhere in this area, about 40 kilometres east of Foster.
It's thought the men had abandoned their sinking yacht and were in a rubber dinghy, but an aerial search of the area by the NBN helicopter and 3 RAAF crafts failed to find any sign of the black and orange dinghy. The search will resume in the morning. Jodie McKay for NBN News.